Hey, what's up guys, Demogorgon here, and today I'm talking about South Asia, the most populous region on the planet, 2 billion people, 9 countries. No surprise it also has one of the world's largest diasporas. It includes CEOs, politicians, celebrities, and everyone in between. In this video, we're going to list 10 cities with the largest South Asian populations outside of continental Asia. So before we start, quick word about methodology. Number 1. For statistics like these, I like to use metropolitan area. That's the city proper plus the suburbs that immediately surround it. Number 2, there are technically 9 countries that represent South Asians, but I'm omitting Afghans and Bhutanese people. The reason is linguistically, culturally, and historically, most people wouldn't really consider them to be South Asian in present day. Number 3, is that I've excluded Middle Eastern cities from being on this list. Technically speaking, the Middle East is in Asia, so that's the first disqualifier. But also, well, places like Dubai, Abu Dhabi, Kuwait City, Qatar, they would dominate most of this list, and that would be no fun if it's just a bunch of places in the Middle East. Okay, that's the methodology. Let's jump into the list. Okay, so coming in 10th place is the Desi metro area with over 230,000 South Asians. This isn't that surprising if you consider that it's the capital of the richest country in the world and also lots of prominent universities. So the actual District of Columbia doesn't have many South Asians. You have to cross the state line into Virginia or Maryland before you start to see the community in bigger and bigger numbers. Places like Fairfax County, Arlington County, Loudoun County, Montgomery County. Those are the suburbs of DC, and they definitely have way more going on. So Chicagoland comes in at number 9 with just around 250,000 South Asians. It's mostly comprised of Indians. In fact, mini spoiler alert, Chicago actually has the second highest number of Indian people in the United States. So this is actually kind of surprising to me because when I think of Chicago and ethnic diversity, I typically think of like Polish or Puerto Rican or Mexican or Black American, but quietly, Chicago has grown a very large Indian community, and that's why it's listed on this. Okay, so for number 8, we're going to the Southern Hemisphere, to Australia's largest city, Sydney, at 277,000 South Asians. So what's interesting here is the composition. So usually it goes Indian as the largest group, followed by Pakistani, followed by maybe Bangladeshis. But in Sydney, it actually goes Indian, followed by Nepalese. In fact, Sydney's home to the largest Nepalese diaspora outside of continental Asia. I think it's somewhere around 60,000 total, which is pretty impressive. At number 7, we have our first entrant from the United Kingdom, and that's Manchester with 325,000 South Asians. What's interesting about Manchester is that the majority of that population is Pakistani, not Indian. This is actually pretty common in that part of the country. British Pakistanis are all over the United Kingdom, but they tended to concentrate in the northern half of England, as you'll see in later on in this list. For number 6, we're going back down under, but this time to Melbourne, Australia. So remember with Sydney, it went Indian first, followed by Nepalese second. In Melbourne, it's a slight little different twist. It goes Indian first, followed by Sri Lankans. We don't typically see Sri Lankans represented in big numbers on lists like this, but Melbourne is the standout. Okay, so we're halfway through the list, and I feel it's a good time to pause and mention 2 places that didn't quite make the top 10 due to a technicality: San Francisco and San Jose. So San Francisco has 200,000 South Asians, San Jose something like 168,000. If you combine the two together, they would land in at the 6th spot, bumping down Melbourne, Australia. Now, the reason why I didn't combine them is because census actually defines those two as separate metro areas, separate urbanized areas. And if you remember from my methodology section, that doesn't work with this list, so that's why I had to leave them off. Okay, back to the top 5. So at number 5, we have the West Midlands, anchored by a place called Birmingham, England, with almost 400,000 South Asians. So what's interesting here is just like with Manchester, it's majority Pakistani. But actually, furthermore, if you just look at the city proper of Birmingham, it's nearly 30% South Asian. That's the highest percent of any of the cities on this list. And it must be one of the highest percentages for a large city outside of Asia at nearly 30%. So for number 4, we're going to Durban, South Africa, with over 500,000 South Asians in that metro area. Here's some historical context. Back in the 1800s, the British had already outlawed slavery. Now, they decided to replace that whole system with indentured laborers. We can discuss the ethics and the morality of that in another video, but basically, thousands upon thousands of Indian people were brought over to work on plantations in and around the Durban, South Africa area. Here's a fun fact. Mahatma Gandhi, civil rights icon, actually spent 21 years of his life as a lawyer in South Africa. Now, most of that time was in Durban. In fact, 2 of his 4 kids were born and raised in Durban. So use that little bit of trivia later on. Okay, so number 3 is New York City, 843,000 South Asians. So here's the deal. Inside the city, Queens is the borough that has the most, right? But once the real standout is actually once you cross the Hudson River and enter New Jersey. So Central Jersey, Northern Jersey, towns like Piscataway, New Brunswick, Edison, Jersey City, all have really big numbers, big percentages, especially of Indian folks within that South Asian community. So number 2 is Toronto, Canada, with 1.1 million South Asians. Now, I'm going to be doing a whole series about diasporas, and what you'll notice is that Toronto shows up on a lot of them. That's just because the ethnic diversity in that city is really, really immense due to lots of immigration that's happened over many decades. The big standout for Toronto is this big suburb called Brampton. Over half of its population is South Asian, predominantly Indian, including a pretty famous one, Russell Peters, one of my personal favorite comedians of all time. I think he's born and raised in Brampton, or maybe he just grew up in Brampton, one or the other. All right, in first place is none other than the Big Smoke, London, England, 1.2 million South Asians across the entire region. So this isn't that surprising. If you think about it, Desis have lived in London for a really, really long time, especially considering the historical connections between the British Empire and then also the subcontinent of India. Fast forward to today, the mayor of London, Sadiq Khan, is of Pakistani origin, and the Prime Minister of Great Britain, Rishi Sunak, is of Indian origin. So it looks like representation politically is starting to catch up with the demographic shifts as well. Okay, that's the list. Thanks for watching. See you on the next one.